This is Colin Dixon with Endscreen Media, and I'm here at NAB 2013, and I'm talking with Andy Beach, who's the founder of Techgeist. Andy's also been with Inlet and Elemental in the past, and he's a streaming media expert. I think that's a fair explanation.
Sure, I think that works well.
You are. So I wanted to talk with Andy about some of the things that we're seeing at the show. One of the first things I think I've noticed that's a big theme is HEVC, high efficiency video codecs.
Right.
So what have you seen? What have you seen at the show about that? And we can talk about what's going on there.
Well, let's make sure we add its other name in there, H.265, because we don't want to confuse, because I've already seen some people confusing, thinking that H.265 and HEVC are competing, and they're not. They're the same thing. So disambiguation, but yeah, everybody has started to show. I think this is the first show where everybody's got their proof of concepts out. So nobody's got anything really shipping yet, but everybody wants to see what are those efficiencies that we've been talking about and starting sort of the hyperbole around, and that's where we are. So nothing is shipping, nothing's ready, but this is that chance, that first look where we can see it in action, and now we're going to probably start checking in. You know, we'll look at IBC as the next milestone of like, how much has it improved between now and then?
Now, you say H.265, HEVC are sort of equivalent, but I was talking with IIO this morning, and they're not H.265. They actually work with an H.264 codec, but they are also claiming the same sort of savings, and they're actually delivering it with Netflix at the moment.
Yeah, so they've taken a slightly different approach, and what they're doing is, you know, everything we talk about in terms of true HEVC and the spec is going to be something that's a future compatibility. So it's going to be something that chips don't necessarily decode today, it will decode tomorrow. The approach the IIO guys are taking is a great one. They're taking the same savings and the same things that are in that HEVC spec, and they're applying it to today's H.264 delivery codec. So you can get some of that early savings in with the way that they're implementing it today. Now, you know, I think, you know, and they haven't talked a lot about this, but I feel like there's a little bit of, you know, there's some cost in time to encode that you may pay as a penalty for that in the way that it's implemented to get it out through 264 today. But it still gets that savings out there today, which is crucial for guys who are delivering not only over the web in general, but over the mobile in particular, because that's where the bandwidth really starts to hurt for high quality content.
Yeah, that's where people have the really low caps and they can really use the savings. Right. What sort of savings are we talking about? I've been hearing 50%. Is that realistic? Yeah,
and the goal of the spec is to effectively double the quality at the same bit rate, or have the bit rate at the existing quality. So I mean, that is the goal of the spec, and that's what everybody's working towards. And you can certainly see that in some of these early implementations, it's close. It's probably more fair to say that we're at more like a 30% savings so far in quality, you know, if we're comparing apples to apples. But once they finish building out some of the advanced specs on the codec, it's going to be a true sort of half bit rate savings over what we're seeing today.
So this is pretty huge for the industry. In fact, I can't think of a part of the industry that this doesn't really, I think, have a relatively beneficial effect, except if you're selling bandwidth, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it literally affects both ends of the spectrum, because HEVC not only brings in this bandwidth savings, it extends the quality resolutions out to 8K. So it's going to bring 4K delivery into a realistic bit rate, and it's going to bring all of those mobile players into a decent cost savings to keep under bandwidth caps and others.
What do you think we can do 4K in? Because I've been hearing uncompressed that it's, you know, 50 meg. Where are we going to get with, you think, compression HEVC for 4K?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if anybody has landed on a true number yet. I think that, you know, I think the guesstimates I've seen sort of working around is that they'd love to hit something at like a 20 megabit mark. I think that's probably the goal that everybody's going to have. I think that they're still a ways off from that, but they're going to get there.
So aren't we putting the cart a little bit before the horse, though, with HEVC? Because it's going to take a long time for the infrastructure to roll out. I mean, every mobile phone today does H.264, but virtually none of them do H.265. Certainly not in hardware. That means that we have to download codecs, and it has to be done in software, which drains the battery more quickly. So that's kind of a non-starter there. Aren't we getting ahead of ourselves?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this, like I said, this is proof of concept stuff that we're looking at now, so it's hard to balance the marketing angles and aspects of it with the realities. The reality is, yes, it is still a ways off. Now, there are some chips in the mobile that Broadcom announced at CES that while they're only 264 today, they can be flashed through firmware to support HEVC. So there's at least a roadmap and a story to get us there a little faster. The reality is though, yeah, I mean, you know, the earliest we're looking at hardware that really supports this stuff is in a 3-4 year time frame, which really means production-wise, we're still at somewhere between 3 and 5 years before it starts to see true adoption. But now, and at these type shows and IBC, this is where we start talking about this, and this is where we see it and start tracking it to make sure that it stays on track for that time frame and doesn't slip into oblivion.
Are we on the same track with 4K as well, do you think?
With the 4K world, there's certainly a lot of people who want it. It's kind of become the new 3D. You know, HEVC and both are perhaps the new 3D because I haven't seen a lot of 3D at the show.
Yeah, that's my sense as well. Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of people trying to rush to 4K. I know I saw some TVs announced. I think it's gonna stay in the commercial world for the next couple of years because it's really something that, you know, under an 80-inch screen, you start losing reason for even having it. So while I love that there's a 55-inch, I'm not going to rush out and buy it because it's not going to help me any.
Yeah, I don't have a spare wall either.
Exactly.
So let's turn our attention to live. That's another really big theme, I think, at the show. Very much people have now focused on bringing linear to particularly linear, because of course we've had quite a lot of live events already with things like the Olympics and the World Cup.
Right.
And I expect those to continue and actually increase. But the big change here is linear, right? People are wanting to bring linear TV.
That's the key. It's not just these one-off events, even though you could call the Olympics a linear event because there's so much of it going on simultaneously. It's still a compressed time factor. You know that there's an end goal, and what we're now talking about is how do we move 24/7 linear channels online for viewing, and that becomes a whole new issue around scalability, uptime, how all of this is going to be maintained. How do you support it with hardware? How do you move some of that into software to make it, you know, a much more flexible system for handling? So it opens up a lot of new issues that the market has to address, and there's a lot of folks that are starting to talk about it, and almost categorically they talk about it as a virtual service or a cloud service, something where you're combining some hardware, doing some encoding somewhere, but ultimately that's very quickly turned into an IP stream that then hits some sort of cloud and then gets scaled into however much content you're going to need for support 24/7. And that's really the only way they're going to deal with it at a decent cost.
It seems to me that that's absolutely right. There's just no way it can scale unless you're using cloud. And it also seems like we're moving away from the idea that you now have to produce a version of your video in every stream bandwidth or resolution that you need to deliver. That will be delivered pretty much on demand, right?
Yeah, I mean the adaptive bitrate world is definitely catching on for this area, and they're trying to make decisions around what best serves the content, but they're also building it so that they can change that over time, so they can adjust to meet the bandwidth needs. I think a little more flexibly.
But it's really tough for live to do this, right?
Well, it is, and you know I think that's where the other components of the analytics side of this comes in. So they need to not just pay attention to what are the reported abilities of Comcast or someone else to deliver a bandwidth at a given bitrate for an extended period of time, but actually look at heuristics coming off of the player to say, what can this device really support when we're viewing it in 20 minutes, in 2 hours, in 10 hours, what does that look like? And they can start building models around that over time that help inform the encoded rates that they're using for their content, and I think that's the approach they're going to have to take. It's going to be one where they're just not only is the content adapting, the content publishers are adapting their content to change over time as they see heuristically how it's being delivered.
Now, I think the cloud is probably exerting another influence on NAB this year. There seems to be much less emphasis on products and much more emphasis on service, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, this is, other than HEVC and 4K, it's not a super buzzword happy NAB as some of the years past have been perhaps, but what it really looks like is it's democratization is the wrong word, but almost a software as a service simplification of these over-the-top services that we've been seeing. Rather than building out your own infrastructure, companies are putting together a model where you can just put down a credit card, place an order, and you've now got a monthly OTT service that you can put together that uses their cloud, uses them to manage license, do the acquisition. All of it can be handled through these other services, and that's a great model for people who either want to dip a toe in the water and test, or the smaller guys who are never going to be able to invest in an infrastructure to begin with. So those niche players can now suddenly sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with the big guys who are out there trying to put together a business deal and a business model.
Yeah, I was talking with Uplink this morning, and I know you know Uplink as well.
Sure.
One of the things I loved about their solution is that yes, they are working with the big guys with Disney, but they've also put some thought into the fact that there are a lot of small players coming in who also want to do live linear, so they allow people to start small.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we've seen, I particularly have noticed over the last sort of year and a half, a lot more indie films, a lot more niche groups that were doing distribution of films sort of just traditionally are now finding ways to dip their toe in the water and offer that digitally and get into all the various platforms so that they can offer the service to their customers who are the filmmakers that are out there. So all of a sudden these guys who are fighting to get into HBO or Showtime, they know that they can go out to these other services that are out there, much easier barrier of entry, and know that they're going to find a pay model that allows them to do business with them. And it's great.
Yep. Well, Andy, we could obviously talk about this for a long time. I think we better wrap it up for today, but I want to thank you for coming in and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks a lot, Colin. I had a great time.
Thanks. This is Colin Dixon with Endscreen Media.